So we have James again for our first reading, as we had the last 2 or 3 weekends, and it's just so James. He just gets right to the point of it, I guess you could say. And this week he focuses in on 2 worldviews, or 2 philosophical outlooks, you could say: the wisdom of the world and the wisdom that comes from above, as he calls it. And he gives us this beautiful description of what wisdom from above is. It is first pure, and then peaceable, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits, without inconstancy or insincerity. And if that's how he describes wisdom from above, then we can easily see what he considers earthly wisdom. It's simply the opposite. It's impure, it's belligerent and callous. It's obstinate, full of judgment, bad fruit, with inconstancy and insincerity. Wisdom from above is always ordered towards the truth of things. And you can only get to the truth of things by being open, right, to possibilities that weren't considered previously, or even an openness of being wrong. And I think that requires a certain purity of heart. It requires, maybe first and foremost, a peaceful dialogue. And the fruit of that is always good, because rather than maybe fighting each other, it becomes this shared journey for truth. A deceptive yet very addictive worldly form of wisdom seeks not the truth, but it seeks the imposition of somebody else's opinion or their objective, maybe their own personal truth. It's not open to dialogue or being wrong. It has no interest in being weighed against other arguments or objections. And while most of the time this does start off with good intentions, it almost always reduces itself to the selfish motivations or desires of its owner. It's a truth that cries out for tolerance while it gains ground. But once it has established itself, it becomes the very definition of intolerance. And in fact, we find a version of this worldly wisdom in our very first reading today. The wicked in this reading face the reality of a truth that they cannot trick or take advantage of. This just one, as the wicked call him, they sets himself against our doings, they say. He reproaches us for transgressions and charges us with violations of the law. And so they become impure in their motivations. They become belligerent, callous, full of judgment. So they put the just one to the test, they say. And the fruit of their work is condemning him to a shameful death. While maybe our culture hasn't quite reduced itself yet to putting people to death for proclaiming the truth, it's certainly in the business of silencing them, or shaming them, canceling them, treating them as outcasts or threats to their own personal truth as they see it. Because the wisdom of the world simply cannot tolerate wisdom that comes from above. You can walk into many colleges today, maybe not all of them, but a good portion of them. And it's ironic, because colleges should be places of wisdom. And you could stand in the square and hold up a sign that says, "I believe in God." And you might find some acceptance, as long as maybe you keep it to yourself, you go to the room that your club is assigned to. But if you hold up a sign that says, "I'm pro-life, from conception to natural death," or if you hold up one that says, "I believe God created us male and female," or another sign that says, "I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman," say those things, hold that sign up, and see how much tolerance for those eternal truths we find. And why maybe we don't find tolerance for it? Maybe because deep down, The conscience of every person recognizes truth from above when it hears it. But when somebody speaks it out loud, after trying for so long to maybe bury it within us, it becomes overwhelming. Just like that first reading. Because when you can no longer ignore truth, you tend to silence it. Whether that means silencing it within our own hearts in our own time, or silencing the one who dares to even speak it openly. We see that in our gospel today as well. Jesus speaks this wisdom from above about his crucifixion, and he's met by his disciples with silence and fear of what it could mean. And rather than being open to it, the disciples begin instead seeking the wisdom of the world. And that makes sense because the wisdom of the world gives us an easy escape from difficult truths. The apostles start by asking themselves, who among them is the greatest? It's as if James is reflecting back upon this moment as he writes, because he says in the very beginning of that letter, where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, so also there is disorder and every foul practice. And that's exactly what the apostles are about to fall into. This desire for status, who is the greatest, has led them to this selfish ambition, this petty jealousy between themselves. And the Lord is aware of it. That's why he brings it into the light. When he asks them, what are you arguing about while we were on the way? And he doesn't ask because he's somehow unaware. He asks because sometimes simply asking the question out loud makes us reflect on maybe what we're really doing. And the response is silence. Their jealousy, their ambition, it's been exposed for what it is, and maybe quite frankly, they're just embarrassed by that. And so Jesus takes the time, because he is the perfect evangelist, he takes the time with them to reset their expectations, right? He says, if anyone wishes to be first, you have to be the last of all. You have to be the servant of all. And in order to show them what that looks like, he takes a child and places it in their midst. Why? Because what child at their core isn't pure, peaceable, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits, right? I know, take maybe the terrible twos out of the equation for a moment, right? But children are just open to that wisdom that comes from above. Why else would they constantly ask us why? And what adult maybe wouldn't be humbled in that moment when our Lord points a truth out like that to them? The smallest of children, man, they may not have wisdom in the sense that we like to think about it, but they almost always intuitively have this wisdom from above, and they are always open to receiving that which is true. And maybe somewhere along the way, as we grow and we mature into adulthood, that childlike openness can begin to fade a little bit. Wisdom from above starts to come into confrontation with the wisdom of the world. A bit at a time. It's slow. And if we allow ourselves to surrender to it, we begin to pursue after it because it is addictive. And when we do so, we start to see the truths in real time that James preaches about near the end of our first reading. You covet, but you don't possess. You kill in envy, he says, but you can't seem to obtain. You fight, you wage war. You don't possess because you don't ask, and when you ask, you don't receive because you ask wrongly, because you want to spend whatever it is you're asking on your passions. How many in our society today covet money or wealth? And once they get it, once they've obtained it, right, whatever it was that they were seeking that lay behind the money or the wealth, it's still missing in their lives. How many kill another? Whether that's physically, which thankfully is very rare, but think about how many of us might at times in our lives kill the reputation of somebody through slander, through gossip, through detraction. How many of us do that from time to time? Maybe because we want that reputation that the other has. Maybe we want that status that the other person has. How many times do we do it in order to possess it? But once we think we've got it, we still feel empty. At the end of the day, if we seek after our own personal version of wisdom and truth, that worldly wisdom, ultimately it leaves us empty. And that's the fruit of worldly wisdom. So maybe this week we take some time and we reflect on that. It can be a difficult thing to reflect on hard truths like this. But maybe we reflect on what James is speaking to us today, which is, which wisdom are we truly pursuing in this life?